As we kick off this discussion about journalism in the age of alternative facts and fake news, I should point out that just to do this today, I felt obligated before we started today to go online and check whether or not the president had been on Twitter overnight. And he was. And if you didn't see this, so turns out this morning, the President of the United States tweeted with the hashtag FraudNewsCNN a GIF of himself at a TV wrestling match, jumping, grounding, and pounding a figure with the CNN logo for a head. Because that's where we are now, folks. We have the President of the United States presenting himself as a kind of luchador assaulting the news media on social media. And this is one of the least disturbing things that's happened on Twitter in some time. Okay, when we report upon this later, this never happened, right? We're clear on that, because that's also sort of where we are. So, right, you know, the topic of how we as journalists are supposed to be responding to the very, very interesting challenges that we have these days is a great, rich topic, and I'm really glad that I'm joined by the panel that we have here today. Now, I should say, notwithstanding every single thing I've said so far, that the focus of this panel is not specifically Donald Trump, although I think we would have to say that he is the Republican elephant in the room on this subject, so that we would have to deal with. I think, though, that, you know, actually, even if we put aside all matters Trump, the reality is that for a lot of reasons, these issues of these increasingly today we talk about as fake news, or maybe more accurately, issues of disinformation, misinformation, problems of trying to report and to function as a journalist in a good, responsible way in the modern context for a lot of these issues. These are more complicated, really, than they have been in a very long time. We've seen kind of whole ecosystems of media spring up around new points of view, and they can reinforce one another and establish their own kinds of facts. We've seen social media amplify different sorts of messages, and they may or may not make it possible for people to say, cozily ensconced inside bubbles of like opinion. We've seen how digital media makes it easy for misinformation to be ubiquitous and really literally never farther away than your own phone. There's been actually a lot of research, genuine scientific research that looks into the question about just how we form opinions and how we react to information that we may or may not want to accept, and it shows just how overwhelmingly we are influenced by issues affecting just our own sense of wanting to blend in with our own cultural set, and how irrational any of us can actually be. Studies that have shown that at least in a lot of fields of science, you know, sometimes half the published results or more may be wrong for sometimes shameful reasons. And we've seen scandals that have involved scientists and different kinds of journals. And a lot of this has legitimately undermined what have been the sort of sources of authority that a lot of us, including journalists sometimes, have taken for granted. So this is a very complicated subject, even if we're not just talking about what in the world is the President of the United States doing haranguing morning talk show hosts on his Twitter feed. So I'm very glad that for this we have this panel of this wonderful trio of these outstanding journalists to talk about some of this. They are, from starting closest to me, we have Helaine Olen of Slate. Next.
Actually, that's fake news. I'm no longer at Slate.
Slate News. Oh. More misinformation on my end of things. That's right. And next to her is Nina Burleigh of Newsweek. And Brooke Binkowski of Snopes.com. That's right.
Wow.
Yes. I will tell you right now, Brooke has said she will try not to swear during this, but there are no promises, so let's see how that goes. And we also are very glad to have all of you as a smart, discriminating audience. Yeah, that's right. So really, this is great. So just, in terms of the format for the day, I'm going to start off by handing things off to each of our panelists. We'll give them a few minutes to sort of make some opening comments about what their position on some of these issues, and maybe some of what their own experience in dealing with this would be, just real briefly. We'll always be able to cycle back to some of that later. After those kinds of opening positions, we'll just chat, kick around some of these subjects for a while, and then we'll try to leave the last 10, 15, however many minutes we possibly can available to field some good questions from all of you and carry on the discussion that way. So with that, well, let's see. Why don't we start off? Actually, well, is there anyone who'd like to go first? Most of all, Nina, would you feel good about trying to go first? Nina, now of course, bear in mind, Nina is here from Newsweek, which is a great journalistic organization named for a time when it seemed like a magazine that dealt with the news once a week might be sufficient. Which shows you. Yeah, right. Shows you how much things have changed. Nina, how have you all dealt with some of this?
Well, we're still kind of trying to figure it out, but the thing that I'd like to talk about is a cover story that I did most recently on the Facebook, with the involvement of Facebook and big data in the election of 2016, which I'm sure you've all heard a lot about, and the use of AI and algorithms to spew out, well, first of all, to micro-target American voters, and then to direct bot-fed fake news at them through the medium of Facebook and other platforms. That's something that I just covered, and I think that's something that I can answer some questions about it as we go forward. But as far as the Newsweek, and as John just said, the whole industry, journalism is reeling, not just because we have a president who's accusing us of making up facts, but because of the financial problems that journalism has been facing, and since we went from paper to digital, our industry really hasn't figured out how to monetize what we are used to producing for the public. So that is a big problem, and Newsweek was basically went out of business a while ago, and then was bought and came back to life, and it is being produced as a weekly in paper with lots of good writing, but we are under a lot of pressure to fill the web with our articles, and so there's a lot of, I guess, problems with standards when you have to produce a lot of material and you have fewer and fewer people to do that. So it's a challenge, but I think that we are, bring it on. I think that we have a challenge, but I think that we're up for it, and I think there are lots and lots of people out there who are doing a really good job, and that we really need the support of readers like you and people who understand the difference between fake news and facts to support and encourage that kind of material and make sure that everybody is paying attention to it.
Oh. Journalism soldiering on, notwithstanding some very significant challenges, and we will definitely be able to get back into more detail about just what some of those are and the influence that they have at different levels. Elaine, how about you? Talk us now. Slate, really one of the web publications that I think went a long way toward doing so much to. Oh yes, well, sorry, it's a good point. Yes.
I'm at The Nation these days.
Right, at The Nation. The Slate, basically an online rag no one cares to read about anymore. Yes.
There you go.
Hey, So when I got the invite to be here, I actually was wondering, like, why on earth anybody would invite me? Because, you know, I think fake news, I think Trump. I normally do finance. I cover sort of the intersection of personal finance, big business, personal life. And in that arena. And I thought, why on earth are they asking me? And I almost wrote back, you've got the wrong person, I'm not going to do this. But then I remembered that's what women do. Men are immediately experts on everything, and I happen to have 2 boys. So I immediately thought, no, I'm not going to write that. And I said, oh, of course I'm going to do it. And then I realized it was 4th of July weekend, and I said, what am I thinking? But by that time, I'd already written back, and I really want to be here anyway. So, and I can't believe all of you are here as well. I just have to say that. So I'm really happy to see this many people engaged on this subject, on this weekend in particular. Never mind what Donald Trump did this morning, right? But in any case, but actually when I thought about it, I actually have been writing about fake news for many, many years, for about 2 decades, because finance is actually, and financial coverage and personal finance, are actually kind of one of the original homes of fake news in the media, with all the talk of when the way the personal finance sort of empires of the media developed was kind of in the early 1980s. And it sort of developed in tandem as the consumer movement was dying out. It was when the advertisers were putting pressure, don't cover cars, don't cover what we're doing, you know, to supermarkets, don't cover food. It's like, okay, we'll offer them financial advice. And then of course the financial services sector rushed in and began to advertise, and then the pressures became the same thing. But people were told over and over again, oh, you could save your way to retirement, as their pensions were taken away from them. Oh, the reason you don't have money isn't because of income inequality, because this is when income inequality starts and then accelerates with each passing year. It's because you're spending too much money on your coffee. And very few people were bothering to do the reporting of saying, wait a second, actually the price of food is going down dramatically, but it's at the cost of healthcare, housing, and education are going up, to the point where in the early 1970s, people were spending about 50% of their income on those things. And today it's over 75%. This is something that's barely talked about. So my job sort of became, over time, sort of the person who would point out these things over and over again, to the point where I once went on a radio show with one of the big editors at Kiplinger's, and he said to me on the air, God, you're a Debbie Downer. After I said, no, actually, most people can't save for retirement. They don't have the money. And in fact, as of this morning, the New York Times apparently has an op-ed of somebody saying people really need to save more money in their health savings accounts, and this is Brett Stevens, and this is what's causing part of our health care crisis, when in fact half the population doesn't have $400 aside for an emergency. That is how poor we are. So anyway, this is sort of my beat, actually, is fake news, though I don't often think about it that way. And covering the Trump administration has just been a bonanza of this, basically. So on that note, I'm going to let Brooke go, whose job it really is to cover the real crazy stuff.
I just got so tired right when you said that. My name is Brooke Binkowski, and I'm the managing editor for Snopes.com, which apparently you've all heard of, which is pretty awesome. This is so cool. Okay, so I generally work out of my house, although we have an office. It's just one of those things where, you know, I got used to working alone and working from home. And so I have that opportunity, so I take it. And, you know, you get real weird after a while when you work from home. So you don't realize that people read what you write and care about what you might have to say. So my input usually during the day is a steady stream of death threats that I get emailed to me and being called horrible names, which I'm just like, all right, well, I'll just dox you. I mean, you know, you don't do that to an investigative journalist, because I'll find out where you live, I'll find out your phone number, I'll find out where you work, and I'll send stuff to your employer. So just, you know, if you think about sending death threats to investigative journalists, I just want to say that that's probably a bad idea. My point here is that I generally don't get a lot of positive feedback, so this is actually very exciting. And I mean, you know, positive attention is always great, and it's really cool. So a little bit of my own background is I'm a career journalist. I was a border journalist for many years, and I started out doing street and crime and things like that, and then I started doing investigative stuff and working in Mexico. And this is relevant for reasons I'll bring up later, but I was just used to sort of doing my own thing and doing my own fact checking and just kind of like being a one-woman band. And I learned a lot about well, authoritarian governments. I learned a lot about fake news. I learned a lot about disinformation and propaganda, because there are many issues in Mexico and Central and South America that involve those things. And I've been applying these to what I'm doing at Snopes. And I didn't expect when I took this job a couple of years ago that it was going to turn into what it has, but I'm glad that I get to be part of it, because I feel as though it's a very important place to be right now. It's exhausting. It's so tiring, but yeah, I can talk about that a little bit too. I don't really want to I don't really know what to say other than I'm trying really hard not to swear.
Once again, only you are imposing that burden on yourself at the moment.
No, I have a mouth like a sewer. It's really difficult.
Well, that's certainly turned off the crowd right there. So no, thank you. So great. So a lot of great subjects surfaced through all of that. And Elaine, to your point, first of all, by the way, apologies again on getting that wrong twice. I think third time if I get it wrong, though, I may make it right. They're
going to come out with a big cane and pull you off the stage.
But also, I mean, you were talking about like financial journalism as you know, that being a problem of problems of fake news circling that way. And I'll say that actually within the world of science journalism, there have been a lot of these kinds of issues that some of the kinds of problems that we're seeing now showing up across all kinds of different subjects, where we're sort of dealing with what seems to be the rampant inversion of, well, what is actually sense and what can we believe or not, as especially this crowd knows, these are exactly some of the kinds of things that have happened with coverage and debates over things like teaching of evolution in schools, and climate change, and vaccines, and genetically modified organisms, and some of this certainly still going on. And that's just on that side of it. There's definitely, I think, there's a real issue of at times about whether or not at least parts of science journalism have sometimes been a little too credulous about just taking certain things that might be spoon-fed to them by big reputable journals and pushing those kinds of things back out, and sometimes following the line of least resistance in terms of just taking what are the embargoes that they received, and that became the big stories from week to week, rather than investigating around and trying to find some other things. So there are a lot of sorts of issues that cut across all different kinds of journalism. Let me take a step back and so how did we get here? One of the things that people pretty much always talk about as a big culprit in us reaching this point in journalism is the rise of the internet. And a lot of what went along with that. Obviously, we sort of got to the point where, thanks to the web, everybody could suddenly be a publisher and put things out, and it could appear seemingly on kind of equal footing at times. Social media certainly altered the way that people consumed media and that talked to one another, and the ways in which they were, in many cases, being alerted to the existence of news. There's issue of certainly things like technology of like digital photography. You know, photographic evidence used to be seen as sort of an impeccable standard of, if you had a photograph of it, it must be real. No longer true. And then we've also seen, of course, and this is something Nina, you alluded to, just how much the rise of the internet did to destroy what were the traditional business models that were supporting a lot of ad-supported media. So do you think, was technology the real big culprit in this, or was it an essential thing for us getting here?
Well, I think that the internet obviously has proliferated the opportunities for people to spread information that is not accurate. So obviously the internet has something to do with this, but it's also enabled people to gauge and judge and learn. So, I mean, my son and I have this argument all the time because he's the generation internet, and he's very he's 17 and he's going into computer science, and he thinks it's a great thing. And it connects people around the world. We wouldn't be seeing things like, we wouldn't be aware of cops killing black people without video availability. We wouldn't be aware of things happening around the world that are that we should care about in the Middle East, for example. So I think the web, you know, it has its good points and it has its bad points, and that's why Snopes is so important, and we need more Snopes-like sites. More. I mean, she's working alone with like 2 people, right?
No. I hired a bunch of people.
Okay.
So
more.
I'm going to put that one to bed.
We need more of that, and you need citizen cadres of this to deal with things that are going on with the science journals. Instead, we have this, you know, there are 2 things going on here. We've got the internet, and you've got these sort of accidental, organic things happening, and then you have the deliberate manipulation that was going on for political purposes. And something else that I'm working on right now has to do with fake intel in Syria. And you know, we got into the Iraq War with fake intel, and there are things that you can do with photographs.
Both of them. Both the Iraq wars.
Both the Iraq wars. Oh yes, okay, going back to, right, that's right. But then the first one didn't involve the internet, it involved the fake testimony, but in Congress. But now there's stuff out there with these gas attacks where you're seeing imagery and it's cocked up. And I have weapons experts that I'm interviewing. I'm going to work on it, write about it this week. But these are things that the internet can spread, and it's very dangerous. So scientists and skeptics are needed to become part of this response to find accuracy and let people know.
I completely agree with all of this. No, you're not. You're saying really great stuff. And I want to touch on the degradation of newsrooms for a minute. So my joke that I usually like to give here is I've been a journalist now for 22 years, which is really weird because, like, in my mind, that's how long I've been alive, and I don't know how that happened. I'm actually not 22. But, you know, thank God, because that was a very stupid year in my life, but I digress. When I started, I was 18, so you can probably do the math, and I was in a newsroom in San Diego in a radio station, and there were about 25 people working there, and I said, oh, this is really cool, you got a great operation, I'm looking forward to joining this. And this was, you know, I was an intern, very bubbly 18-year-old, I was excited, I wanted to be a reporter, and they said, you should have been here 2 years ago. There were 50 people here. And I was like, wow, that must have been amazing. They said, yes, it was. So this was one local radio station in San Diego. You know, it wasn't Market 2 or Market 1. It wasn't, you know, it was just San Diego. So I went back to that same radio station about 2 or 3 years ago just to say hello and see if anybody was there, you know, who I knew. I just moved back to San Diego. And there were 5 people working in the newsroom. And that story is played out in newsrooms across the country, national, international, but most importantly, I think, local, because, and I say most importantly because local news is the lifeblood of democracy in many ways, because it helps people understand what's going on in the world around them. This has created, this ongoing spiraling of journalism has created a situation in which there's an information vacuum, and humans, I really do believe that people want to learn things. People want to know. It's one of our main drives. You know, you've got Maslow's hierarchy of need, and maybe at the top of the pyramid, the hierarchy, you have learning, but it's an incredibly important thing. And people will always seek out information. That's just our drive. And if you don't have access to information that's vetted and solid and trustworthy, you will absorb misinformation. It's just how people go. You will read things because they're there. If you have nothing that's vetted and nuanced and contextualized for you, you'll read stuff that is essentially bullshit. I owe you $1.
I'll go ahead, and I have a worse potty mouth than Brooke, by the way, so I will try also. I actually once got a true story. I once had a first grade teacher call up and complain because one of my children was imitating me. So, and I think I might have said no shit. But anyway, I'm going to go back to the 1980s too, but I'm actually going to bring up something that people don't talk about very much anymore. How many people in this room remember something called the Fairness Doctrine? Okay. Okay. So for the people who don't know what the Fairness Doctrine was, it was legislation. It was regulation that came in at the beginning of the television era in the late 1940s that basically said both sides of an issue needed to be presented. Okay. Yes, we actually had rules about this sort of thing. And in the late 1980s, I think it's 1987 if I'm remembering right, it goes away under the Reagan administration, thank you very much. And within about 2 years, I am hearing a dude named Rush Limbaugh on the radio in New York City. Really, he comes in late 1980s, in 1989 in New York. And because all of a sudden, you don't have to give both sides of the story anymore on TV or radio, because the Fairness Doctrine is gone. And sure enough, a whole ecosystem develops over a period of years where you suddenly don't have this anymore. And you have Fox News, and you have more and more radio, most of which leans right, but not all of it, I should say, where you literally are not hearing both sides of the issue. So when the internet begins to come in the early 2000s, you actually have an audience already primed not to hear both sides of the issue because they haven't been hearing both sides of the issue. And it's already a problem. And so this is an ongoing problem that comes in. And then you come in and the internet comes in. And of course you have your echo chambers. But you also have the fact that the journalism model is literally collapsing at this point because of the internet. And one of the things people realize very quickly, and this is a business issue, is that opinion is cheaper than real journalism.
Yep.
Journalism's expensive stuff, people. I know it doesn't seem that way, but you'll be working on a story for weeks and it won't pan out. This is expensive. Like, this adds up. When in the age of the internet, people can't afford that anymore. In the age of the advertising revenues drying up, that money doesn't exist. So what happens is people begin to chase what little digital ad money there is, and they begin throwing opinion up online and barely paying people to write it, by the way. I mean, so a lot of this opinion you see, and I'm talking about from some of the most respected organizations, is not paid for, or it's paid very little. And that's what most people are clicking on, because we are primed to look at what we want to believe. This is not exact news, right? This has been going on since the beginning of time. And it just becomes worse and worse and worse as both the finances of the industry collapse and the social media kicks in. And so people are suddenly not even going to the front page of the New York Times or even to the front page of Breitbart. They're seeing it on Twitter or on Facebook. And the algorithms are giving them what they want. And this is a problem that has to be addressed in some way. And there have been very few moves at this point to really do it. You could talk probably a lot more about this than I can, but it's an ongoing issue, and nobody has figured out how to fix it, really. Certainly, nobody has figured out the finances of journalism at this point, aside from hoping a really rich guy who likes journalism buys you and doesn't impose his opinion on you. I mean, that seems to be the one model there is out there. But certainly from the social media end, it's an extremely hard thing to deal with.
Yeah. Can I just say one, as far as the people not being able to respond to fake news in terms of there being no model, there is a lot of discussion and activity, and VCs have actually put up money to combat it now. There are funds, they're looking for apps and programs to deal with this situation. MIT is holding conferences. There's something called MisinfoCon, where there are people who write apps coming to try to sell these programs. So it's a Silicon Valley issue. What you're talking about?
This all frustratingly to me misses the point, which is you can't. And I realize the irony of me saying this, but I'm only one, like, what we do is only one prong of what really needs to happen. You can't just waste your energy running around, correcting people. As satisfying as that is, it's not viable. What needs to happen, what truly needs to happen is journalism needs to be prioritized. You need to flood out misinformation. You need to drown it. You cannot just hope that it goes away on its own. It's not going to. It's going to get worse until something is put in place. And I really, as you all probably also know, Snopes has been partnered with Facebook. We're one of 6, I think, organizations that have partnered to kind of help with misinformation and disinfo and fake news and all of that. And what we do is very hands-off. Basically, if we've already debunked something, and it appears on a list generated by Facebook, we say we've debunked this. That's it. And I feel as though that's good. I believe it's helping them with their algorithms. It's helping them, look into what news is disputed and what isn't. But at the same time, Facebook has sort of distant, and Twitter too, social media has sort of distanced itself in general from this idea that it's media, and with that it's distanced itself from specific responsibilities that it has. And I mean, it's got media right in the name. It's like you can't really say you're not a media company if you're called social media. And so I think that that's a conversation that needs to happen, and journalism just really needs to be prioritized financially, but also culturally.
Oh, I think that's is a good point for me to bring up this question I wanted to ask, which is journalism itself, as we're trying to practice it today, is it different from what we were doing in the past? Should it be different from what we're doing in the past? Are there underlying things that are constant running through this, or are there also some kinds of norms that have also changed a lot?
I don't want to take over, I'm sorry everybody, but I do want to point out that there have been periodically, with the advent of new technology, fake news and disinformation. I specifically am saying disinfo because I think that distinction really needs to be made. We're not dealing with fake news. We're not dealing with satire. We're not dealing with people making stuff up just for fun. We are in some ways, but really what we're seeing is sustained propaganda, disinformation efforts, and we need to address everything as such. And so to answer your first question, no, I don't think the underlying tenets of journalism ever change. I think that, finding as much as you can and excavating as much information as you can is essential and integral to it, and I don't think that's ever going to change. However, I think that it's, its delivery obviously is changing. I forgot what I was going to say. I had something really important to say and I forgot what it was. I'm really jet lagged, sorry.
Although, I was just curious, Elaine? Nina?
Oh, I mean, I'll say something. I mean, obviously fake news and propaganda is not exactly anything new. It goes back pretty much to the beginning of the I mean, it's always been around, but as far as, this conversation, it really goes back to the dawn of the tabloid era. If we remember the Maine, the ship that was blown up by the Spanish and of course got us into a war and actually wasn't blown up by them. And it really, goes on into World War I and with the atrocities the Germans supposedly committed. It really goes way back, and I think part of it is it's a reflection of, again, people want to believe what they want to believe. It also tends to crop up, frankly, in societies that are less than fully literate. And I think we have a lot of people in this culture who are, don't really read, aren't that interested in engaging with pure fact or facts that challenge them. And that's something, again, it's very hard to force on people. I mean, people are people. So we sort of come up with these ideas of, oh, well, we'll change the algorithm for this, or, we'll have this app. But in fact, people have to want it as well. And one of the things you learn in journalism is that a lot of people, they want what they want. And if somebody's going to give it to them, they're going to take it. So the issue is how on earth do you stop the flood coming in? And how do you stop this from coming around?
I don't think it's possible to stop the flood of misinformation from coming in. That's why I always say it's got to be drowned. I remember what I was going to say now, by the way, sorry. Every time there's a new communications technology that becomes mainstream, there's a flood of misinformation that comes with it. So in the 40s, I think it was, there was a flood of fake stories coming through radio stations. And they had a constant theme, which was Black Americans were trying to take over, and there was going to be an armed uprising, and they were communicating with each other, and they were going to have this revolution where they were going to overthrow, the white majority. Does any of this sound familiar to anybody? I mean, it just seems like, it never changes. And this whipped up so many fears that it contributed to a lot of violence, and it was because people did not know yet how to distinguish. It was still relatively new. And so people didn't understand, and then there was the famous, what was the Orson Welles play? I mean, that wasn't specifically, it wasn't specifically fake news per se, but it just goes to show you how easy it was to be confused between what is real and what is not. The internet has come up in our lifetimes. It is still very new technology. Social media, I mean, I remember the good old days before anybody had ever heard of social media. We had, MySpace and Friendster and things like that. And AOL, I guess, was a social network. But it wasn't in the lexicon, in the cultural lexicon of the United States, or the world now. And so I think that what we have to remember is that we are still dealing with new technology, and people are still learning. And they're learning how to distinguish between what is real and what is not. And so if things seem extremely hopeless, which I know they do, some of the time, a lot of the time right now. Just remember that that is an end goal of disinformation, to make everything seem hopeless, and this is not unprecedented, and it has been solved in the past, and it will be solved again. Oh, okay, thanks, I had to get that off my chest.
But I feel like I do have to push back a little bit, at least to get sort of like some letter of what was said. I have a feeling that we're not actually in disagreement about some of this. I think I asked the question of, is journalism different now? Are we doing anything different? Should we be doing anything?
Yeah, not paying your journalists, or not you, but not paying journalists. That's new.
Yeah, but I think that the key there is that in fact there are certain sorts of things that have been changed, and I know this is, I'll choose this as an obvious sort of example of something like on a subject like climate change. There was a real issue on the science desks of different organizations, also coverage of issues about evolution and creationism. There was a lot of soul searching that went on before a lot of journalistic organizations decided that they were going to take the important step of not continuing to push a certain kind of false equivalence, false balance, of making sure that every story that they had, that they didn't find some creationist someplace, and in the process accidentally give that kind of misinformation, disinformation a voice and a level of credibility that came on. And so I'm just wondering about how much now do we need to push it forward? Because we are in a time where, in a lot of cases, especially where we are looking at great sources of power that are allying themselves with the disinformation, that when you call that out honestly, it becomes a political act. It becomes a partisan act. And there are people who will say that it is inappropriate for us as journalists to be doing that.
Well, fuck those people. Go ahead, sorry. Yeah.
That's been a problem since the campaign. You know, people at the New York Times and CNN, and I mean, as you know, CNN was one of the. If they treated Trump as an entertainment and a ratings multiplier. For a long time, and then they started calling him out, and the New York Times started calling him a liar, and the Washington Post actually started saying the word lies. So you're absolutely right. Elaine is absolutely right. People want to believe what they want to believe. And so, yes, we should be calling these lies what they are, but we are then aligning ourselves onto a certain side, and that actually, in some ways, increases the chasm or the gulf between people what they want to believe and what they don't want to believe, and putting journalists on one side, then enabling the president to take on specific companies like CNN and blame them and point them out, and his fans who want to believe what he's saying are going to be whipped up in a frenzy against this company and these people and the journalists out and about. And that's where you get to the Montana situation, where the congressman now literally punched and pushed down a journalist. And so it is a problem. It's a huge problem to have to call out facts and point out that this president is not telling the truth, and then have his fans want to believe what they want to believe. And that I don't know what the answer to that is, other than to keep going in the direction that we're going.
Right. I mean, I would point out that it does go back a bit. It's sort of the fall off in social norms. I mean, 25 years ago, to say, oh, I don't believe in global warming, I mean, part of it was a fringe position. I mean, this was just not stuff you either, if you wanted to be seen as respectable or be taken seriously, you simply didn't say in public. And I think, again, there's been this kind of slow, gradual descent of allowing of defining, I don't know if you're defining the standards up or down here a bit. I'm not sure what the right terminology would be. But essentially, you sort of have the tabloidization, this sort of gradual creep that over time has led to what we are dealing with now, where we have somebody in the White House who is, tweeting really ghastly stuff on Twitter. And by the way, why is he on Twitter? I mean, shouldn't that be seen as like somewhat undignified? I mean, you start to wonder about these things and how it slowly, slowly happened. And again, I'm not sure what the answer is either. I'm not sure how you go backwards from that point.
Well, I just want to say that I don't know that it's the tabloidization that caused this as much as we and our profession insisting on getting the opposite point of view, even if it was wrong or inaccurate. And that was a rule. I mean, we had to do that, and I think that now not doing it is shocking people who were used to being pablum-fed stuff that they wanted to believe.
Well, I would say that you did need to get the opposite side, but you didn't have to go into the sewer to get the opposite side. I mean, there was this sort of idea that there was this respectable left and this respectable right. And yes, there were issues with that. I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna. There were some real issues with that. But you weren't going to get stuff like, oh, well, Newtown didn't happen, you know, that these were child actors. You weren't going to get the crazy.
That is one of the most disgusting things I have ever heard, by the way. Whenever I hear that, I go into this blind rage.
I'm the same way, and I am. I would flat out say Alex Jones should have never been allowed on television to even talk about this.
Never.
I mean, but that's what I mean. I mean that 30 years ago, he wouldn't have been. There wouldn't have been a takedown on NBC because it wouldn't have occurred to anybody to put him on NBC. I mean, it would have just been sort of, this is like, you know, news of the world turf. Like, and nobody would have acknowledged it. And that has been a huge change in the culture.
But also, I mean, going along with that, I mean, 30 years ago, if he wasn't on NBC, nobody would have known about him, essentially. Right. Whereas these days, there are other ways it comes out, and then suddenly he shows up on NBC because he's seen as having gained a kind of currency in the culture that he's supposed to be done. So are there choices that we make, we accidentally play into the perpetuation of this sort of, this bad information that's being spread?
I mean, there have been a lot of mistakes made, and a lot of them have been mistakes that are brought about by lack of a budget. One thing I would really like to address that I don't think a lot of people who aren't journalists know about is the culture of journalism, which journalists are we work really hard. We want to, many of us really want to make the world a better place. And we really have this sort of ideological view where we just feel as though if we just tell the right stories and say the right stuff, that we will make things better. And so we're frequently extremely disappointed, of course, but it doesn't stop us from trying. It's a very specific personality type. And so we'll do what we do for very little money, and we'll do what we do when we're working 7 days a week, and we'll do what we do when we're working 18-hour days, 7 days a week, until something happens. And that's why journalists often have heart attacks very young. They end up like alcoholics. They end up, you know, with drug addictions and things like that because you work so hard and for so little money. And the reason I'm bringing this up is not to say, look at us, look what we do, but to say, when you're on your 5th story of the day, you know, and you're on deadline, your deadline's 5:30 and it's 5:15, and oh shit, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna get fired because, oh my God, I need my health insurance. It can, you know, if you even have it. And you're feeling all this pressure, and you're not sleeping enough, and you're not eating enough, and you're just working too much, you're gonna screw something up, inevitably. And all the editors have been fired too. You know, I mean, it's like there's this perfect storm of bullshit right now, and it is incredibly clear that it's not gonna go anywhere good unless it gets reversed somehow. And so that has also done its part to decrease the perceived legitimacy too. It's like, oh well, CNN's just fake news. Look what they did. They totally screwed this story up. Oh well, actually, they didn't really screw the story up. It was just like that kind of thing is really discrediting the media. Right,
but the big thing to remember is when CNN makes a mistake, they admit it. That's a big difference than telling a lie and sticking to it.
Yep.
The panel, I think you will thoroughly agree, has entirely lived up to all expectations of them having lots of great things to say, and I think it would be great to be able to have an opportunity for some of you to be able to address some questions directly to them, individually or collectively. I'm not sure how we're handling questions. Do we have some?
So a question about Facebook and Snopes. You said you had the partnership. So after you identify something as fake and you tell Facebook, what do they do?
I honestly have not been able to figure it out.
Asked and answered.
I spend as little time thinking about it as possible because if I start to think about like the potential effects and impacts that we have, I get so freaked out. It's better that I just talk to my dog all day and, you know, eat pita chips out of a cup or something. But no, I really don't know what they do with it. Actually, when they first emailed me, because I was in some article somewhere and they found me through it. And I get this, I open it up and it's like, hi, we're so-and-so from Facebook. We'd really love to talk to you about a potential partnership. I'm like, oh my God. So I close my laptop. I'm like, I cannot handle this right now. It's just way too much pressure. So that's where I'm at. And then I just forwarded it to my boss. I'm like, you handle this. Short answer, I don't know. I mean, I assume they're building algorithms with it. And I know that they flag stuff as disputed. And other than that, I'm sure if I asked, they would tell me, but I just...
I feel like we're building an algorithm is becoming the check is in the mail of the 21st century.
Oh, and I also want to point out that all of these like misinformation cons and everything, it's great. I mean, I'm going to a fact checkers convention after this and, you know, cool. But the amount of money, I've gone to some of these conventions and I've pointed this out and it doesn't go over well, the Silicon Valley ones. Like those things, they have to have cost, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars. I mean, you could pay probably at least 2 or 3 journalists for a full year on what these conventions are costing to put on. So why are we sitting around like, you know, mentally masturbating to what we need to do, and what needs to happen is we need to have more journalists.
Next question.
So should I hold this? Given that like we have a lot of sort of conservatives out there with radical ideas, but you know we also have these like liberal publications that are sort of churning out all this clickbait nonsense hyperbole. It's
major problem.
What do you guys, you know, I wonder is there like a specific type profile of a journalist that sort of goes after both sides, you know, because I'm not seeing it so much, and I think it's not helping the situation. And we have like, I find myself playing devil's advocate for the right or for conservatives all the time because, you know, there's so much nonsense on the other side now too, and it's difficult.
No, we address both of those things, which means we get twice as much hate mail. It just doesn't maybe seem like it because we've been the disinformation is louder on the extremely far right, the white nationalism, the alt-right. Those issues are coming from. I don't even know if you can call them right-wing anymore. They're so far off the spectrum. They're just like out in the ether somewhere, and yet they've taken hold of the conversation. So they spout off so much BS. But yeah, the left is like not far behind. The extreme far left, the chemtrail crowd is what I call them in my head. But we debunk those too.
There's a new article actually that just came out in The Atlantic that's actually is about precisely the subject about the issue of the concern of rise of some of this kind of thing.
I do believe I'm quoted in that.
There we go. But I mean, I do think though, at part of this, I think this goes to part of the issue about like the level of prominence to some of these things and why sometimes people perceive it as again some sort of bias that's built into the media. Is that a lot of from as far as I can see, a lot of those positions, you know, there's a kind of lunacy that's present on both the left and the right on this, but a lot of the lunatic positions on the right are represented as political platforms to a degree that on the left they do not have the prominence that they would otherwise. And I think that creates a real problem because then people say when you cover that, it's like, well, look at you, you're horribly biased. Why aren't you spending more time covering about this kind of vaccine measure? It's like, well, because there isn't currently this sort of, you know, there aren't certain sorts of security measures being trying to push through all of us that would refer to vaccines, whereas there might be on issues of immigration or racism and the rest.
Yeah, I could talk about it, but I'm totally taking over, so please.
Yeah.
Sorry, another Snopes question. The typical Snopes headline is like XYZ true, XYZ false. Have you guys thought about, and it's been shown that basically everybody just forgets about the false and forgets about the true and reads the rest of the headline.
That's actually been debunked.
Has it been?
Yes, that is not true.
Okay.
Particularly depressing factoid is not true. There have been, that study was proven, and I cannot cite figures for you right now, I'm sorry, I am so jet lagged, but I was talking to actually the guy from Pointer who does all the fact checking stuff, and that study that proved it was inherently flawed, and follow-up studies have shown that people do change their minds. I mean, I'm sure some people just dig their heels in, because I hate being wrong too, but you know, it's not as dire as it sounds.
Excellent. Another question? Yes.
Yes. We're lay people, or at least I am. So I don't write articles. What can we, as your everyday people, do to make a difference in this process?
Subscribe to something. Subscribe to journalism. Yep, good. I mean, if more people do, that's an important part of it. I mean, it's the business models depend on that sort of thing more than ever.
And turn off your ad blockers for specific sites that you like. Sorry. Ugly but true.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, if you have
Elaine,
ad blockers, turn them off.
Well, if you're on social media, I guess, you know, pass around factual information and stand up for it, and stand up for truth versus lies. I mean, that's really all you can do, I think.
And I would add, if you're on social media, you know, and I think we've all made this mistake now, check before you retweet something or you know, reshare something, or whatever the terminology is for whatever site you're on.
Read it all the way through.
Read it all the way through. Make sure it's credible. Go to Google and double check. I mean, I guess, no, you probably don't need to do that for the New York Times, but if it's if it's another site that you're not sure of, or it's just your friend saying something, I mean, I frankly have been embarrassed by this more than once. I think everybody has at this point. It's just something I'm starting to automatically do now.
Yeah, good.
Earlier in the conference, it was mentioned that skeptics are more on the defense than offense, which is kind of a losing game. So my question is there any kind of real legal action that can be taken against perpetrators of fake news besides just defamation and libel? And I wonder if we can get some creative, skeptical lawyers working together on this.
That's a really good idea.
That is a good idea. I don't actually know of any lawyers, ways that you can sue, because we have the First Amendment and you can basically put anything out there. But I do think that there are lawsuits, and there's an issue in terms of this micro-targeting of people. You know, you can, the algorithms can now sort people into 25-person groups across our nation. Our voters can be divided into 25-person groups. They call them fireplaces. And those 25-person groups may not know each other, but they have been identified as similar by Facebook's lookalike program, which they sell to, it's an advertising program which the Trump campaign used. And they also can take that information and identify what certain people believe in certain things and share target information to those tiny little groups. Now, that is a privacy issue because they have, they're using 4,000 or 5,000 data points on you that are commercially available, okay? And this big data situation in the United States is out of control. And in the UK and in Europe, they have laws against this. And there are lawsuits, and there's a class action suit being filed in London regarding what Cambridge Analytica was doing with Brexit, but they are bringing in plaintiffs from the United States if they get it going, and it's going to be a huge, if they are found to be in violation of these laws in Europe, it's a huge potential settlement. It'll put SCL and Cambridge out of business. So there are lawsuits like that, and you know, you can look into them, but as far as like shutting up people who are spreading fake news, I'm not quite sure there is a way to legally stop that. But I'm not a lawyer, so.
No, I mean, I would say actually the legal climate is completely in the other direction of stopping people who are telling legitimate journalists. It's actually a quite hostile environment right now.
Extremely.
And it's something I really wouldn't want to really get to very much, because what tends to happen with these things is it comes back to us ultimately. I mean, it's not a one side, one side's going to do this and go, oh my God, we're going to settle this. I think the privacy stuff is much more of a salient point. And I think people in the United States really don't realize that we have almost no rights to privacy the way they do in Europe.
It's not even being discussed.
Right.
And I highly recommend everybody in here to inform yourself and pass the word around.
You'll get really mad.
Trump opened it up so that Verizon and AT&T can now sell your browsing information like from the spigot from your house.
Good. We have a bit less than 5 minutes left to go on this, which means we still have less than 5 minutes to go. We can ask more questions. Oh, yes.
Hi. It seems like it's really important to reach younger people first, so they can see the value of good journalism and where to find it. Do you agree, and are you aware of any programs that target people, say, pre-college age, to give them these kind of values?
I am personally part of developing some of these curricula. I also do classes. I recently did some, it was like, I'm not sure what it's called, I can't remember, sorry. But it's like an online course, but for high school students. So there were something like 100 participating high schools. I'm doing that more and more. I think that is important. I think that we've sort of lost this skill of distinguishing between propaganda and news. And I think that is an important thing to learn. But I'm also kind of reluctant to put the onus on the news reader or the news consumer, because there's only so much any one person can do when you have this constant barrage of stuff. So, yeah.
As a parent, my kids come home from private school and New York City public school with lists of information sites that are acceptable. So I think it's education, and I think they're doing it into schools.
I would say, as somebody who has studied the financial literacy movement in depth, I think that it's important that the schools do it, but I also think it's probably an overrated solution, because the change is just too quick. You say use this site, and 3 weeks later another site pops up. I think the issue goes back to something in our society, actually, which is, as I always tell my children, is just because somebody says it doesn't make it true. In journalism, we say, if your grandmother says, the sky is blue, go out and double check her. I think that is something that is often lost in our society. It makes people difficult. It's not always a popular thing to tell people, but it is really the defining aspect of a skeptical mind, as I think people in this room probably know, is really you need to teach people to question what they've been told. And that, to me, is really the key.
On the topic of the Fairness Doctrine, would any of you support returning to a system something like that? And if so, how would you make sure that that continues to be objective and concerned with accuracy through successive administrations and potentially future Trumps?
I guess this is probably me. This is something I would need to think about a lot more to really talk about intelligently, but I would say I do support some reinstatement of it. It would obviously have to be changed enormously to update for the modern environment. One part of it that would really need to come in, and this is in the interest of bashing both sides, by the way, is another huge chunk of this, and your comment about left and right really reminded me of it, is that one of the things that happened in journalism as well was that in the mid-1990s, it used to be you can only own so many TV outlets or so many radio outlets. Duopoly. And under the Clinton administration, so see, this is a left-wing thing as well, that rule got taken away. And that is part of why local journalism and why the radio station's newsroom also emptied out, because all of a sudden local radio stations weren't really local anymore. They were being piped in from somewhere central.
This is another thing that's endemic in journalism now, too. used to be able to just be really good at radio or really good at doing television or really good at photography or a really good writer. Now you have to be really good at everything all at the same time for the exact same story. So you see these journalists going out on their own, and they've got a camera that they bought off eBay, and they've got, you know, a little recorder that they got secondhand somewhere, because, I mean, journalism pay is terrible, right? And because of all of this, they have to do all of these things and submit them with a story, but they don't get paid any more than they ever did. So that creates way more work for us. Plus, you know, we're just, I can't emphasize enough, like, we get tired.
Well, I'm sad to say it's just after 3:05, and there is no alternative fact that will change the fact that we are out of time at this point. However, oh, yes,
Can I make a, I'm sorry, I
yes,
have like
please.
one closing statement. I'm sorry, this is my agenda, and I will stick to it, by God. So, there's a couple things I want to say. First of all, I want to say that we are in an age of disinformation, not just fake news, not satire, not, you know, just propaganda, but disinfo. And the end goal of disinformation, especially when it's coming from outside a nation, and I'm not saying that the United States is innocent in this, by the way. We have been complicit and have spearheaded exactly these kinds of propaganda campaigns in the past. I'm a Latin America scholar. I can tell you stories. Half my family's Bolivian. I can tell you terrible stories, Mexico, and so on and so forth. So I'm not absolving us of this. However, since it's happening now, and we are in the middle of it, I want to say that one thing that you can do, besides not being, you know, credulous and not passing around incendiary information, is to be genuinely kind to people that you may not agree with, because this is not just a Pollyanna thing, because the end goal of disinformation is to turn people against each other, to shatter a national identity, to make people pliable and vulnerable as a nation. And when you are not kind and when you have no sense of unity, it makes it extremely easy to make a country a weak state. When a country is a weak state, the people all suffer. When the people all suffer, the country becomes weaker, and so on and so forth. I've seen this happen again and again. I've seen it happen in Mexico. I mean, Mexico is a great, you know, it's a great example. I've seen personally, I've known 7 people who have been horribly murdered, and one guy who died of a heart attack because of the stress. And those were border journalists, people I know from Mexico, from all over Mexico, and a few activists. And I'm one of the lucky ones, because I can still remember how many of my colleagues have been killed. Most of my colleagues who are still alive in Mexico cannot. They've lost count. And this is the end result of demonizing the media. This is the final result of disinformation and misinformation. And that is what we need to avoid. So don't speak or act in anger. Be better than the disinformation. That is my, you know, my soapbox. and stuff the man.
I think those would be lovely closing words for all of it. So I think with that in mind, so thank you very much for your wonderful attention, but most especially please join me in thanking Brooke and Nina Helaine for wonderful contributions on an extremely important topic.